Norway. Land of eternal ice. Land of majestic fjords. Land of northern lights and endless sunsets. A thin mist rises from the deep fjords. The northern lights paint the sky emerald green. Thunderous waterfalls cascade down from wild peaks. Welcome to Norway. Welcome to the land of the Vikings. Known as the Way of the North, as the ancient Norse called it. This is a land where seasons defy the laws of time, and where nature has carved fjords like scars in the rock. But let's start from the beginning. Norway stretches along the Scandinavian peninsula, embracing territories that span from the Arctic to the Antarctic, being one of the few countries in the world to possess lands at both extremes of the planet. With its over 15,534 miles, or 25,000 kilometers of jagged coastline, dotted by more than 1,000 fjords, if we stretched out its entire coastal line, it would be as long as half a trip around the Earth's equator. Among these giants of rock and water, the Sognefjord stands as sovereign. It's the second longest fjord in the world, with over 124 miles or 200 kilometers of extension, and reaches abyssal depths of over 4,265 feet, or 1,300 meters. Along these coasts, furthermore, nature stages spectacles that challenge the imagination. Indeed, for 76 consecutive days, from May 14th to July 29th, the sun refuses to set, creating the so-called midnight sun phenomenon. While in winter months, the northern lights dance in the sky with shifting colors from green to violet that enchant anyone who lifts their gaze. Norway is nevertheless an immense land, but hosts barely 5.4 million inhabitants, a decidedly low density, especially if we think that most residents are concentrated along the coast. On the other hand, Norwegians are regularly at the top of World Happiness Index rankings, demonstrating that well-being isn't measured in quantity, but in quality of life. Continuing, traditional Norwegian architecture tells a story of perfect symbiosis with nature. Indeed, houses are often sunken into the landscape, with grass-covered roofs that wave in the wind, and this is an ingenious system to automatically regulate internal temperature. Sustainability, furthermore, flows in the veins of this nation, with 98% of electricity produced coming from hydroelectric sources, and with the highest percentage of electric cars per capita. On the remote Svalbard Islands, surrounded by Arctic ice, hides one of humanity's most precious treasures. The global seed bank is a vegetable Noah's Ark that safeguards the entire biodiversity of the planet for future generations. But Norway is also the homeland of modern skiing. Indeed, the word ski itself derives from ancient Norwegian and means piece of wood. Norway, therefore, is much more than a simple nation. It's an entire world. A place that continues to tell its story to anyone who visits it. But now let's go discover the most incredible and iconic places of this nation. Lofoten Islands. A chain of islands connected by bridges and tunnels beyond the Arctic Circle. The roads connect fishing villages and stretches of wild nature that knows no interruption. The mountains rise directly from the water, creating a landscape where fjords, bays, and beaches of light sand follow one another. The rocky walls are steep and jagged, marked by time and weather. Along the coast stand the Rorbuer, small red houses that once gave shelter to cod fishermen. Today, though, they welcome those seeking direct contact with the sea and with a way of life still tied to its rhythms. Winter brings storms and northern lights that cross the night sky, while in summer, the sun doesn't set for weeks on end, tinting everything with continuous light. Seasonal fishing continues to mark the life of the communities. And this activity is not just economy, but the identity of the place and of the nation itself. Oslo. The Norwegian capital extends along the fjord that bears its name, surrounded by hills covered with forests. The city is an interweaving of different eras. There is the Opera House in white marble that faces the water with contemporary lines, while the historic neighborhoods preserve stone streets and wooden houses. The museums safeguard the memory of polar expeditions and Viking ships, testimonies of a maritime tradition that crosses the country's history. Between one building and another, we find parks where sculptures and green spaces slow the pace of the city, creating a dialogue with nature. But the harbor is the true beating heart of Oslo. There are ferries that cross the water, markets that come alive in the morning, and restaurants that fill up in the evening. This is not only Norway's administrative center, but also a meeting point where innovation and memory touch each other every day. Geiranger Fjord. An arm of water winds into the land, deep and sinuous, shaped by glaciers during the last ice age. The rocky walls descend vertically for hundreds of meters until they touch the dark water of the fjord. The waterfalls throw themselves directly into the void, interrupting the quiet with their roar. The best known are the Seven Sisters and the Bridal Veil, and each is accompanied by stories that the local inhabitants have passed down through time. On the shores, suspended on grassy slopes, the remains of abandoned farms can be glimpsed, traces of a past made of isolation and hardship. Today, ferries and small boats travel the fjord, connecting the villages scattered along its banks, such as the village of Geiranger, which is the gateway to the fjord, and a reference point for those who live there. The fjord, moreover, has entered the UNESCO list, thanks to its balance between nature and human presence, which continues to exist. Atlantic Road. Several bridges challenge the waves of the Atlantic and connect a series of small islands along the western Norwegian coast. The route is just over 5 miles or 8 kilometers long, but is considered one of the most intense routes of the entire nation. The curved bridges rise over the water, allowing the passage of boats and offering unusual perspectives of the sea that opens beneath them. Along the road are found panoramic rest areas and points from which to observe the landscape that changes continuously. Nearby fishing villages testify to the long relationship between these communities and the ocean, made of work and resistance. Svalbard Islands. Halfway between Norway and the North Pole, we find the Svalbard Islands, in an archipelago dominated by glaciers, tundra, and dark mountains. Longyearbyen, the main settlement, is the world's northernmost city. The colored houses break the white of the surrounding landscape. Here coexist scientists, miners, and travelers. Life adapts to harsh conditions, but maintains a close relationship with the fragile polar ecosystem. The islands are a refuge for Arctic fauna, with polar bears, foxes, and reindeer moving between the frozen valleys, while seabirds nest on the cliffs that plunge into the sea. Svalbard represents an extreme frontier where human presence is minimal, temporary, and always aware of being a guest, in an environment that does not forgive mistakes. Yet people continue to live here, driven by research, by work, by the curiosity of being at the margins of the world. Bergen. Between mountains and sea lies a city that is the gateway to the western fjords. Its heart is Bergen, the ancient Hanseatic quarter, where rows of colorful wooden houses face the water. These buildings, now a UNESCO heritage site, preserve in their narrow alleys the atmosphere of when this was the center of the dried fish trade throughout Northern Europe. The harbor market continues this tradition with fresh fish stands that alternate with museums, galleries, and theaters that make the city also a cultural reference point for the entire region. A funicular climbs to Mount Flåm, from where the gaze embraces roofs, islands, and open sea. Bergen is usually rainy, and indeed the rain seems to be part of the landscape itself, filling the streets with shiny reflections that accentuate the colors of the facades. Tromsø. Beyond the Arctic Circle rises a settlement that pulses with life. The city develops on an island, connected to the mainland by bridges and dominated by the Arctic Cathedral with its geometric forms inspired by the ice of the north. Here are based universities, polar research institutes, and music festivals that bring energy and movement even in the dark months. Winter, in fact, here brings long nights that extend for weeks, embellished, however, by the northern lights. In summer, instead, the days never end, with the light that remains suspended on the horizon without ever disappearing completely. The harbor is crossed by fishing boats and tourist vessels that connect the city to the islands and Arctic fjords. Just outside the city, open landscapes made of snow-covered mountains and coasts beaten by the wind. Senja. The second largest Norwegian island shows two completely distinct faces. The western coast is marked by mountains that descend straight into the ocean, creating cliffs, inlets, and beaches that remain almost hidden. The peaks are sharp, sculpted by wind and time. On the eastern side, instead, the landscape changes. The hills soften and forests and villages appear, where fishing is still the center of daily life. The fjords cut the island deeply, penetrating the land. The light sand beaches seem out of place in this north, with their appearance reminiscent of warmer places, while wildlife moves freely in the territory, with sea eagles, whales, and reindeer. The island unites the energy of the open sea with the quiet of the communities that live there, and is an authentic portrait of northern Norway. Stavanger and Lysefjord. A port city with a double soul. The cobblestone streets and white wooden houses of the Gamle Stavanger neighborhood tell of past centuries, while the oil industry holds up the economy of the present. Stavanger's history is linked to the sea, to the commerce that passed through here, to the ships that entered and left the harbor. Not far from the city opens the Lysefjord, a water corridor over 25 miles or 40 kilometers long. The rocky walls fall vertically into the dark water without margins or slopes. Navigating this fjord means observing isolated villages clinging to the shores, waterfalls that descend from the sides of the mountains, and a landscape that changes appearance with the light of day. Here, urban life meets nature in its most intact form, and neither prevails over the other. Flåm. A village hides at the end of a fjord, surrounded by rocky walls that rise like giants. Flåm was born in a narrow fjord between Europe's steepest mountains, where space is scarce and nature dominates everything. The railway that descends to the village is one of the most spectacular routes in the world. The train crosses tunnels carved in the rock, passes next to waterfalls, and descends from the mountain until it reaches this remote corner. Visitors can arrive, however, also by water, thanks to ferries that navigate between the narrow walls of the fjord. During summer, the sun stays in the sky, almost without interruption, illuminating the paths that climb toward the isolated farms. Winter instead transforms everything, with the village becoming a kingdom of snow and ice, and darkness covering the mountains. North Cape. Where Europe meets nothingness, a barren cliff plunges into the immensity of the Arctic Ocean. The promontory rises over 984 feet, or 300 meters above the water, facing a horizon where in summer the sun remains suspended for weeks without ever setting. A metal sphere marks a symbolic point of Europe's extreme north, having become a meeting place for travelers. The environment here is severe. The wind blows almost always. Fog covers the landscape. Temperatures remain rigid for most of the year. There is no shelter nor gentleness in this place. Yet this geographical frontier exerts a particular fascination. It is the sensation of being at the margins of the continent, where land ends and immensity begins. A point beyond which one cannot go. Preikestolen. A natural rock platform rises sheer above the Lysefjord. The walls descend vertically for hundreds of meters without interruption. To reach it, one must travel a path of about 2.5 miles or 4 kilometers that crosses woods, small lakes, and rocky stretches. Along the ascent, the landscape opens gradually. At the top instead, the space is flat, wide enough to accommodate several people who lean over the void. There are no artificial protections, only the silence of the wind and the immensity of the landscape that stretches between the fjords. From here, one sees how deep the cut that the fjord has carved in the earth. This place is also a symbol of balance between nature and human presence. Sognefjord. A water corridor penetrates the hinterland for over 124 miles, or 200 kilometers. Narrow between rocky walls that rise up to 3,280 feet, or 1,000 meters. It is Norway's longest and deepest fjord, with dark waters that capture the sky. Small villages face its shores, and many are reachable only by sea. Medieval wooden churches dot the landscape, witnesses of the continuity of life in these isolated valleys. The fjord's lateral branches lead toward waterfalls that throw themselves from the rock, or toward glaciers that descend from the mountains, or toward cultivated fields that resist in a climate that does not forgive. Ferries and local boats move slowly along the waters, connecting the communities that for centuries have found here their only route of exchange. Trondheim. Founded in 997 as the Viking capital, the city still preserves today a weight in Norwegian history. The Nidaros Cathedral, built in stone and decorated with Gothic sculptures, has been the coronation place of sovereigns until the last century. Around it develops the historic center with lively streets, wooden bridges, and colorful warehouses that reflect in the Nidelva River. The university and cultural institutions give the city a young energy, creating an interweaving between tradition and innovation. In the residential neighborhoods, the painted wooden houses maintain the Nordic atmosphere, while the harbor continues to be an important hub for exchanges and connections. Trolltunga. A tongue of rock extends into the void, suspended above Lake Ringadalsvatnet. It is one of Norway's best-known natural formations, the result of glacial erosion that over millennia has sculpted the plateau. To reach it takes hours of walking through paths that cross peat bogs, lakes, and rocky expanses. The landscape changes continuously along the route, and the hike is demanding, but the path itself becomes part of the experience. Arriving at the top, however, the view opens impetuously on mountains, deep waters, and valleys sculpted by ice. From here, one sees how much time has worked on this land, modeling the rock and creating forms that seem impossible. Ålesund. The city lies on several islands, all connected by bridges. In 1904, a fire destroyed it almost completely, but it was reborn shortly after, with a new face. The lines of Art Nouveau architecture mark its appearance, with colored facades adorned with turrets and floral motifs that reflect in the harbor canals. It is a unique urban fabric in Norway. The center is compact, and the streets open toward lively squares and fish markets, where daily life unfolds with the rhythm of the sea. A stairway climbs to Mount Oxla, from where one sees the entire archipelago and the mountains that surround it. Ålesund is also a starting point for excursions toward the nearby fjords, but the sea and fishing still mark its times, as they always have. Nærøy Fjord. An arm of water narrows to just a few hundred meters, framed by mountains that rise almost vertically on both shores. It is one of the most intense branches of the Sognefjord, recognized by UNESCO for its natural beauty and for the integrity of the landscape that surrounds it. Here are found villages that tell the essence of communities that for centuries have had in the fjord the only route of communication with the outside world. On the shores still survive remains of landings and ancient paths that connected the isolated farms. It is not rare to see goats grazing on the slopes, sign of a simple economy that exploits every strip of available land. Rene. A small village that faces a stretch of sea surrounded by pointed peaks that descends straight into the water. The fishermen's houses, which are the traditional roerbur, painted red, rise on stilts along the inlets. Daily life still revolves around fishing. The cod hung to dry on wooden racks characterize the landscape, marking the rhythm of the seasons. The narrow roads connect the village to other small centers scattered in the Lofoten, with the sea appearing and disappearing during the route, and the mountains approaching and moving away. Here, the simple architecture, the work of the inhabitants, and the surrounding environment compose a balance that remains unchanged for generations. Henningsvær. The village develops on small islets connected by bridges off the Lofoten. It is known as a fishing village, but also as a place that unites tradition and contemporary art. The wooden houses line up along the harbor, while warehouses and old structures have been transformed into shops and ateliers. Cod fishing remains fundamental, but in recent years the village has also opened up to tourists, attracted by the harmony of the context. Among the rocks and water has been built a soccer field, which has become a symbol of the creativity of a community that has been able to integrate sports, art, and tradition in a remote landscape. Henningsvær has not chosen between past and present, but has made them coexist both without forcing. Hardangervidda Plateau. A vast rocky tableland extends as far as the eye can see, marked by glacial lakes and heaths beaten by the wind. It is Europe's largest plateau and is a refuge for herds of wild reindeer that cross ancient migratory routes. Here silence dominates, broken only by the rustling of water that slides toward deep gorges. The villages at the margins of the plateau maintain traditions linked to fishing and pastoralism. Shelters and trails trace thin lines in an almost primordial landscape, and those who walk here cover distances where the horizon seems infinite. This place tells the essence of Nordic nature, austere, open, and never tamed. Jostedalsbreen Glacier. An expanse of living ice stretches between deep valleys and steep slopes. It is the largest glacier on the European continent, and its glacial tongues slide slowly downward, creating blue rivers and meltwater lakes that change appearance according to the seasons. The ice moves, cracks, and transforms under the weight of its own time. In the surroundings, birch forests and waterfalls accompany visitors to the edges of the ice cap. One can also walk on its moraines and approach the glacial fronts, where ice meets rock. Here, one observes the force and fragility of nature in the same instant. Holmenkollen. At the gates of Oslo, a green hill guards one of Norway's sporting icons. The Holmenkollen ski jump stands out against the sky, symbol of a centuries-old tradition linked to Nordic skiing. The first structure was built in the 19th century and since then has hosted international competitions and moments of national pride. Today it is used for ski jumping and flying competitions. Next to the ski jump is a museum that tells the history of this sport, from its origins to contemporary champions. In winter, the slopes fill with enthusiasts who go up and down. In summer, instead, visitors climb to the panoramic platform to observe the city and the fjord from above. Jotunheimen National Park. Jagged mountain chains rise with peaks that exceed 6,560 feet, or 2,000 meters, among the highest in all of Norway. The name means home of the giants, and there are glacial valleys, deep lakes, and trails marked by time that offer always changing scenarios. Here are found the country's most imposing peaks, destinations for hikers and mountaineers who come to measure themselves against the mountain. Traditional shelters dot the territory, creating a network of routes that connect nature and hospitality. Those who visit this place can pass from one shelter to another, always finding a place to stop, rest, and then continue. Over the centuries, these mountains have nourished legends, inspired poets, and marked the routes of shepherds and hunters. Kristiansand. A coastal city faces the North Sea, orderly and bright. It was founded in the 17th century by the will of King Christian IV. Its historic center is characterized by a regular grid of streets and white wooden houses that tell of the urban planning of the era. The geometry of the city is still visible, traced centuries ago, with precision. The harbor, moreover, has always been active. It has favored commercial exchanges for generations, and today is both a departure point for ferries to Denmark and the place where daily life unfolds. In summer, the city opens to the sea, with beaches that fill with bathers, and the nearby archipelago becomes a destination for trips and days outdoors. Hardanger Fjord. A water corridor extends for more than 62 miles, or 100 kilometers, between mountains that guard glaciers and cultivated slopes. All the shores are dotted with orchards. In spring, the apple trees in bloom transform the landscape, covering the slopes in white and pink. Towns like Oda and Ulvik preserve traditions linked to fishing and to cider production, which here has centuries-old roots. Imposing waterfalls like Vuringsfossen plunge from hundreds of meters, feeding the sense of continuity between mountains and sea. The water descends, throws itself into the void, reaches the fjord, and continues toward the ocean. Navigating or walking along this fjord means crossing a territory where cultivated nature and wild nature coexist. It is certainly one of the most recognizable landscapes of Western Norway, where man has learned to work the land without fighting the mountain. Lyngen Alps. North of the country, a mountain chain reflects in the dark fjords, creating a harsh and silent landscape. The peaks exceed 5,905 feet, or 1,800 meters, carved by glaciers that descend almost to touch the sea. Between the slopes open narrow valleys, crossed by streams and by small settlements, where still today exists a deep bond with nature. In winter, the snow transforms the mountains into a destination for skiers and mountaineers, who seek slopes far from the beaten pistes. Summer brings brief blooms and temporary lakes that disappear with the arrival of cold. This is also Sami territory, where ancient traditions coexist with a natural environment that requires respect and attention. Arendal. A maritime town, stretches along a fjord marked by centuries of commerce. In the 19th century, it was a vital center for sailing navigation, with shipyards and traffic that connected it to all of Europe. Today, its center preserves colored buildings that face the harbor, with streets that gently climb the surrounding hills. Water here is always present. It is found in the docks, in the small moored boats, and in the ferries that connect the nearby islands. The harbor continues to be the heart of the city, where daily life develops. During summer, cultural events animate the streets, bringing music and people to the squares. Dovrefjell-Sunndalsfjella National Park. A rocky plateau extends between valleys and bare peaks, marking one of Norway's most ancient landscapes. Here lives the muskox, one of the continent's rarest species. There are also herds of reindeer that cross the expanses and golden eagles that fly over the ridges, searching for prey. The trails cross rough terrain with lichens and mosses that resist wind and frost. Over the centuries, this region has been a natural passage route. Kings, pilgrims, and merchants have crossed it along the ancient road that connected Oslo to Trondheim. Today it is a protected park, but maintains intact its function as a natural border between north and south of the country. Hardanger National Park. A series of mountains with gentle forms draws the central horizon of Norway. The peaks here exceed 6,560 feet, or 2,000 meters. It is the first national park established in the country in 1962 to protect the herds of wild reindeer that still today travel its valleys. The landscape alternates wide expanses of tundra with clear watercourses and plateaus covered by low vegetation that changes color with the seasons. Traditional shelters and huts welcome travelers and hikers. Those who cross this park perceive a slow and authentic rhythm, far from the rush of the cities. Lindesnes Lighthouse. On the southernmost point of Norway rises a white tower facing the meeting between the North Sea and the Skagerrak Strait. The lighthouse was lit for the first time in 1656, becoming the oldest in the country. Since then, it has guided ships through difficult waters marked by currents and storms that have swallowed vessels for centuries. Around is found a rocky landscape with cliffs that dive into the sea and wind-beaten paths that run along the coast. Climbing to the lighthouse lantern allows one to observe the open horizon, where the sea has always marked the destiny of coastal communities. Concluding this visual journey through Norway, we have moved from the fascination of its majestic fjords to modern cities, discovering together not only places, but also curiosities that make every corner of this northern land unique. We hope that the images and stories told have enriched your knowledge and stimulated the desire to personally explore the extraordinary beauty of this nation.